Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to today's press conference. Today it's just giving Indigenous people a voice to speak about how the climate crisis has affected them and how polluters affect their land. We have four lovely speakers who will be joining us, and we have a few already here. So we're going to start off with Kianna, who's going to speak about it from her point of view.
Yate she Kianna Pete inshe she togling initially na she bashichi na hishle dashiche na kaiden edashinele. Hello, my name is Kianna, and what I just said is how I introduce myself in my native language. I am Navajo. And before I begin, I want to start off with a quick land acknowledgement. I reside on Navajo and Pueblo land. The community I grew up in was founded on the displacement and mass genocide of these people. It's also imperative to recognize that these people still exist and their culture still thrives. I wanted to start off with a quick land acknowledgement because it's important to highlight how my country came to be. The US is founded on the mass genocide of Indigenous peoples. The Western world brought diseases and a new lifestyle that forced the oppression of Indigenous nations. This is further expanded upon through the eradication and displacement of several tribes throughout the US history, from events such as the Louisiana Purchase, taking away Indigenous land, to the Indian Removal Act of 1830, forcefully removing Indigenous people into reservations with environments unfit for them. Then a century later, trying to rid reservations altogether. Today, tribal reservations are supported by tribal sovereignty, meaning these tribal reservations have the authority to govern as they wish. This should mean Indigenous people have a say in what goes on, right? But that can't happen anymore. Although some Indigenous tribes have sovereignty, the damage and aid has become so late to help these communities. As society continues to exclude Indigenous people from these issues, the disparities will not be solved. It is a structural violence rooted in environmental issues. 332,000 members of the Navajo Nation, where less than 50% of the population live on the actual reservation. Bigger than most eastern states, the Navajo Nation spreads over 27,000 square miles over New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona. Along with other tribal governments, the Navajo Nation faces challenges of poverty that result in the lack of resources like clean water, electricity, technology, and internet. In addition, face mass incarceration in densely populated areas, have inadequate healthcare providers, poor education systems, and sacred land that continues to be stripped away. World War II started in 1939, but the US didn't enter until the 40s, influenced by the bombings at Pearl Harbor. During this time, the US government began competitive developments of technology for war. The Manhattan Project became, which is one of the biggest projects taken on from 1942 to 1946. And for the project, the government needed isolated land with uranium minerals to build nuclear weapons. The federal government chose like a few overseas locations, however, sought out New Mexico and particularly the Navajo Reservation to be one of those critical points to extract uranium materials. Building these new uranium mines, and naturally Navajo people gravitated towards working in them. For many Navajo families, uranium mining meant a first contact with the broader US wage economy, and these Navajo families were thankful at the time they had this employment. The mining companies that occupied the Navajo Reservation had clauses in their leases that required them to keep the environment in good condition. Federal inspectors didn't keep up with these regulations, and they let a lot of these mining companies go without actually cleaning up anything. And due to how like secretive the mines were, considering it was built during the war, these companies didn't tell what the Navajo people what these mines were actually for. And they actually didn't inform them of how harmful these chemicals that they were extracting were. And there was such a huge cultural barrier between their languages and the US language that they weren't able to communicate that message. In addition to the previous, these mines built from the Manhattan Project, the nationwide mining boom industry began to grow in the United States. And so the US government remained by law the sole purchaser of uranium mines up until 1971, but then private owned companies began to build on top of those mines already developed. Previous occupation of the Manhattan Project, authority for all of the federal government rule was justified by the crisis of the nation. So now further occupation of new mining companies is still influenced by the federal government and its needs. Today, miners and their families say that they have no idea that there were long-term health hazards associated with uranium mining, and virtually all of Navajo miners reported that they were not educated about the hazards, and they were even reassured by many people who work there that they weren't in any condition that would be harmed. That wouldn't be harmed. And even the workers themselves, there was a huge disparity. Many Navajo workers worked for minimum wage and were slightly paid less than their white counterparts. And then soon after all of these mines had been abandoned, Navajo people sought out these materials in these mines and began to build their homes with these materials, because of course they didn't know exactly what they were. They began to build their homes, and these mines actually began to leak into their water supplies, and they caused many diseases such as different lung cancers, tuberculosis, and other respiratory diseases, not only just killing the workers themselves, but killing the community around it and damaging not only just their health, but like the agriculture and the way they live. And it wasn't until 1981 where the US government actually started to acknowledge its hazards in uranium mining, passing like the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which only applied to miners who worked before 1971. And this act required many legal documents that many of these Navajo people didn't have, such as like an ID, a marriage license, or a birth certificate. And so it isn't until 2019 was the act actually expanded to actually fit those Navajo people who needed help. And that was like too late of an action. The most recent death that I know of was in 2015. Helen and her children went to a spring on the reservation. 7 of her 10 children died from water contamination of both the mining and the fossil fuels that surround the reservation. Helen and her kids were in her homeland, and you're supposed to feel safe at home, but that just isn't the case anymore. And then when these environmental changes are created by the federal government, happen to an already marginalized group, they're the ones most affected by any global activity that is detrimental. For Indigenous people, COVID has hit them the hardest. Currently, as we speak, the Navajo Reservation has a total of 468 deaths and over 9,220 positive cases. Their numbers surpass 13 states in the US, and the Navajo Nation has taken strict precautions implementing mandatory 57-weekend lockdowns. When we ask ourselves, like, why are these numbers high, and it directly ties to that environmental piece. Only 30% of residents have reliable, clean water sources. There are still places that have contaminants in them, despite many cleanup efforts and projects. Already before the pandemic, were Navajo Nation citizens traveling hours to haul clean water supplies. The pandemic has forced residents to leave the safety of their homes. Healthcare facilities are sparsely located, as well as affordable grocery stores. The agriculture has dwindled not only from the uranium mines, but also fossil fuel industries because built close to the communities. It disrupted more than water supplies, weather patterns of the area. It also disrupted weather patterns of the area and the soil that the Navajo Reservation is on. The federal government has also failed in providing funding for these communities. Many tribal schools ended up closing very late in comparison to the US schools, and had a 3-month delay in federal funding. And prior to getting that funding, many Native organizers themselves had to gather supplies and accept donations outside from the federal government and outside our country as well. I mean, we received a lot of aid from groups in Ireland and many groups from New Zealand. And Indigenous people build their lives around the environment. However, when there's no environment to live off of, then what does it mean for Indigenous people? And Indigenous people knew about what these results would bring and have been protesting. Just yesterday, the federal government had reversed its decision to shut down the North Dakota Access Pipeline, which is an oil pipeline built through the waters of the Standing Rock Reservation. And this is in hopes of preventing what has happened to the Navajo Reservation, preventing those disparities and all those preventable deaths that could have happened. Currently, Native Alaskan tribes have been protesting the building of Pebble Mine at Bristol Bay. Indigenous are the caregivers of this earth. Our culture and beliefs are tied to the ground we walk on and that of which we've been displaced. Indigenous people have been neglected in all areas of our society. My country has failed Indigenous peoples and continues to silence them. Environmental justice to us means justice for the death of our people, reclaiming land back to us, regaining what was taken from us. And the Indigenous people are excluded from these conversations. Not only is their environment neglected, but also the continuance of their culture and existence of the people. And one of the things that within like my own culture that we always do is we always end with like a little prayer, or we always end with like a little good wishes, because I just mentioned a lot of bad things happening with my culture. So I'm just going to say this real quick and then we can pass it on to the next person. Jogo nashato, shilaje hojogo nashato, shikete hojogo nashato, shikaje hojogo nashato, alto shinago hojogo nashato, hojonaskli, 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 hojonaskli. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Passing it on to the next person, we have Santiago.
Hola, buenos días. Tal vez no pueda no pueda estar muy bien en estos momentos de nivel de inglés, entonces voy a hacer mi presentación pues en español. No sé si tengan alguna duda o inquietud o alguien que me pueda ayudar con la traducción, estaría bien. Bueno, buenos días, mi nombre es Elder Santiago Galindo Castill. Soy descendiente de un pueblo originario del país Colombia, departamento del Cauca. Pertenezco a la comunidad NASA. Bueno, en estos momentos estamos viviendo una crisis medioambiental tras de tener encima políticas extractivas por parte del gobierno y de agentes de desarrollo regional. En nuestro departamento nos vemos implicados que la empresa desarrollo y explotación de proyectos mineros ambiental está impulsando en el territorio Sí, vale. Espérame un momento, ya lo paso. Bueno, en el territorio
I'm not sure what's going on with Santiago, but while he has some time to prepare himself, could we move on to Sonya?
Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about the climate change in Russia. I think that the effects of climate change are becoming increasingly obvious nowadays. For example, this year, just like last year, Siberian forests, they are called taiga, are burning, and at the same time they occupy 45% of Russia, and the biggest part of the continent. So and the problem is that many of the fire areas are not put out, so fire is not stopped because they are not located near settlements, and there is no funding for that from the government, and that is the hugest problem because at the moment about 21 million hectares have been burned, and at the same time millions of tons of carbon dioxide are released, which of course affects climate change. And at the same time, when it gets warmer, the forests burn even more. So that is some kind of a vicious circle that no one wants to break. And it also happens to the massive floods in the western part of the country. Government just doesn't want to deal with it. And I think that another of the most obvious consequences of climate crisis this summer is the spill of fossil fuels, of diesel fuel in Norilsk. It is a city in the northern part of the country, near the Northern Circle. This happened due to the melting of permafrost, ruining the equipment at the factory of Nornickel company. And at the same time, the company lied about eliminating the accident, but public organizations, they found out that entire river ecosystems in the north of Russia, they are on the verge of extinction due to the disaster. And they also found out that hazardous waste has been drained into rivers in the north for many years, and nobody has stopped it. I think that to prevent such catastrophes, governments should introduce environmental standards for business, but they on the contrary, they repeal them. For example, recently they allowed to extract fossil fuels on the territory of reserves, and we started a petition to prevent that. Recently, we also have launched an online campaign against the new laws that will allow large companies to destroy forests and build factories in the surroundings of the continent's largest lake, Baikal. Lake Baikal, it contains 20% of world's fresh water. It hosts more than 1,000 species, and more than 80% of the animals near Baikal, they are endemic. And I think that the most horrible thing that connects all these events is that government doesn't recognize climate change, and it considers it some kind of conspiracy theory. And I think that without the participation of Russia, the world will not be able to approach the terms of Paris Agreement. I think I understand that now in Russia there is a political crisis. It's happening, and people are more concerned about many social problems, but not the climate. I think that most of the citizens, they just don't know anything about it. But I think climate justice and social justice, they are connected in a lot of ways. And if we don't start to think about climate crisis now, more social problems are on the way. Also, I wanted to say that nowadays it is getting harder for us to talk about it. If before this summer we could at least go to single pickets, now we are even detained from them. Me and another activist, we were arrested just a couple of weeks ago, and we don't know if we can go out and protest safely in the future, or even create petitions without the danger of being arrested one more time and get some penalty. So I think it is very upsetting, because the government, they don't want to talk about climate crisis, and they also don't want to give us a chance to talk about it. So this is quite sad, and I think that's all I wanted to say about. Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking. Santiago, if you're back, could you please speak? Or if not, Sharmaine, could you speak, please? Sharmaine?
Ako na. Gani, no. Tama na. Tuloy na niya. Mag-great ako. Good morning. Oh.
Good evening. Good evening, Manggo. Basta nag-load sa siya. My name is Sharmaine from the Ethno-Linguistic Group of Manobo, a LUMAD student from the southern part of the Philippines, Mindanao. There are 17 million total population of indigenous people in the Philippines. 60% of the said population is LUMAD, a generic term of 18 major ethno-linguistic groups from Mindanao. Indigenous people are the frontliner in defending and preserving the ancestral domain. Are the frontliners in defending and preserving the ancestral domain. Environmentalists and activists. We built our own schools way back in 1980s with the help of child-focused advocates, churches, institutions, academic, and other individuals, as it is our highest expressions against agribusiness plantation, large-scale mining, and logging concession. According to Global Witness report last 2019, Philippines is the most deadliest country for environmental activists. Schools is our expressions in resisting and defending our land. Schools, parents, teachers, and students receive a numerous of threat. In 2017, the President have put Mindanao under martial law. In July of the same year, he threatened to bomb LUMAD schools. Because of this, the Save Our Schools network documented a 700% spike in cases of attacks. These are aerial bombardment and discrimination, firing, threat, harassment, and intimidation, fake and forced surrendered, forced evacuation, frustrated killing, and extrajudicial killing. On school, since the Duterte assumed office in 2016, it was when the Backwit schools was set up, a mobile education for indigenous children. The LUMAD Backwit School served as a venue for child, teachers, and community leaders to campaign against state-sponsored attacks on IP schools. Through lobbying, dialogues, and protest, the LUMAD Backwit School became not just a chance for the children to continue their education, but a chance for Mindanao to spread awareness and descent in the country's capital. Taking refuge current in UP Diliman, we are 75 individuals comprising mostly of LUMAD children have been going back from Mindanao since 2017, hopping from institution to serve as temporary sanctuary. The adjustment of everyone here at the capital region is a challenge, although free from direct military threat and harassment. Living in Metro Manila is as though it was in Mindanao. Everything was new, ringing from common difference in food, people, environment to cultural adjustment. The children have braved this all just to protect not just the school but at ancestral lands. Amidst of global pandemic COVID-19, the attacks against us did not stop. As of March 2020 to May 2020, Save Our Schools network documented not less than 20 attacks on schools and community. 176 LUMAD schools forcible shutdown, and the Philippines government passed the anti-terror bill into law. This law primary purpose is to silence the government critics and dissent to silence to environmental defenders. This law will legalize the killings and other human rights violations in our community, because since then our community was staged as terrorism campaign. Duterte's complete sellout of our ancestral land to corporate mining, logging, and agribusiness plantations is the primary reason why the government is hell-bent in closing down our schools. Thus, by protecting our rights to education, we cannot effectively assert and defend our ancestral land. Hope is stronger than fear. Save Lumad schools. Thank you. Natabunan ako, master.
Thank you so much for that. Last but not least, Santiago.
Bueno, gracias por el espacio. Lo siento por los inconvenientes que tuve, pero vamos. Bueno, como ya les comentaba, en Colombia estamos viviendo diversas cosas. La crisis por la que estamos viviendo son políticas, leyes y cosas que están implementando en los planes de desarrollo nacional y departamental acá en Colombia. Muchos de ellos, los pueblos originarios, como nosotros, nos vemos amenazados por estas políticas. Estamos siendo atacados de forma indirecta por minería, hidroeléctricas, entre otras cosas. Además, la empresa minera de desarrollo y explotación de proyectos mineros ambientales está impulsando en el departamento, en mi territorio, explotación minera de oro y bauxita, como son otros minerales preciosos, las cuales no hemos decidido dejarlo hacer, ya que desde nuestra cosmovisión y cosmogonía son pocos los intereses económicos por el cual estamos incluyendo. Además, es para mantener un equilibrio. Donde quieren hacer esta explotación son en sitios sagrados, las cuales se han defendido por miles de años y se seguirá haciendo. No queremos minería ni ningún método de extracción, ya sea convencional y no convencional. Lo mismo son los distritos de riego que se quieren hacer. La empresa hidroeléctrica Electrohuila quiere construir un distrito de riego en nuestro afluente de vida, en nuestro río, en el cual disminuiría el caudal en un 40%, dejando afectadas a las comunidades que viven de la pesca y se mantienen de esto. El territorio se verá en un desequilibrio total. Nuestros ancestros nos han dejado cosas muy claras de que por lo que debemos luchar, por lo que debemos hacer y cuáles debemos mantener, nuestras tradiciones, nuestros usos y costumbres, pelear por nuestro territorio, por la madre tierra y saber cuáles son los demás intereses los cuales debemos afrontar y no debemos dejarlo al lado ni debemos dejar que demás personas se apropien de lo que es de nosotros, tanto que podemos tener un régimen de políticas, una hegemonía política en el cual se ven implicados todas las personas y nos están dejando a un lado. Nosotros, frente a esto, no queremos nada, queremos que se respete y que no se haga minería, que respeten los sitios sagrados, que respeten a las comunidades. Nuestro modelo de mantenimiento es autónomo, no queremos que empresas intervengan. Además de que el departamento se ha involucrado por muchas otras más cosas, la extracción de minerales para la exportación fuera del territorio, lo mismo que los monocultivos, ya son de pino, se están viendo en esto, no queremos nada de esto, queremos que se haga un pare y conforme a otras comunidades originarias de Colombia, no estamos dispuestos a seguir siendo maltratados ni violentados por todas estas empresas, las cuales están llegando cada vez más a este territorio y a los demás, que nos asesinen por estar defendiendo esto, que nos quiten todo esto por un modelo que no es convencional, un modelo de desarrollo fuera de lo común, y los impactos ambientales que estamos viendo en el territorio son demasiados. Las temperaturas han aumentado, la calidad del suelo ha decaído, ya no se ven los mismos animales, han tenido que irse, ya no estamos prestos para todo lo que pueda venir. Entonces queremos hacer un pare, no más. Entonces es como un llamado y una exigencia al gobierno por el cual estamos pasando. Yo creo que también en Latinoamérica, en algunos otros países se está viviendo todo esto. Entonces debemos ser conscientes y trabajar unirnos. Nosotros acá en Colombia ya empezamos, pero nos falta mucho que recorrer, aunque ya tenemos ya una experiencia, pero debemos seguir fortaleciéndonos junto con todos los demás compañeros de Latinoamérica que están luchando porque no haya más extracción con métodos convencionales y no convencionales.
Gracias, Santiago. Es muy interesante todo lo que dijiste y tienes razón. Realmente el gobierno debería tener sus derechos ante todo. But I'm going to translate what Santiago said. So basically, he's saying that the climate crisis is something that affects all of us on the planet. The economic models of the territories are one of the main contributors to this phenomenon. And Colombia is a country. Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't say who is Santiago. Santiago is from Colombia. He is from the department of Cauca, and he is from an indigenous community. So now he was saying that Colombia is a country that is governed by monopolies and consumerist extractive policies that only seek to maintain and increase the private economic sector of certain people, for which they do not care to pass over anyone. He was saying that the original peoples are affected, and they are already seeing the consequences of the climate crisis because the temperature has increased, the quality of the soil has changed, and they are no longer see the same animals in their region. They are being indirectly attacked by the government and extractive companies. In the department of Cauca, they are threatened by extractive policies which are within the national development plans. For example, a company named Desarrollo y Explotación de Proyectos Mineroambientales is one of the companies that is attacking the department with extraction of gold and other minerals, among other things. They want to make the exploitation in a sacred place for them. So they are saying that they don't want mining in their territory. As well, the owners of another company, an hydroelectric company, are studying the possibility of building an irrigation system that will be directed to another region. This will cause the water flow to decrease by 40%, affecting the community members who live there. I'm gonna quote what he said. Our ancestors have made things very clear to us. We have to fight for our territory. all over Latin America, we are living the same situation, and we have to fight because we don't want anyone to destroy our territory. That was what Santiago said.
Thank you so much, Santiago, for speaking, and thank you so much, Mariana, for translating for us. That is all of our speakers now, so if anyone has any questions to ask them, this is the time. Joe?
Yeah, this might sound like a stupid question, but what gives you the energy to fight? What is it that motivates you to keep fighting for your land? Is it just an issue of existential survival in essence? Is that what keeps you going?
I'll go ahead and start on this. For me, it's always been the preservation of not only just like the land, but just the preservation of my people. And also I myself, as like I'm living, I become a hope of all of my ancestors that weren't given a chance, that weren't, they didn't have the resources to actually fight. And that's kind of what keeps me going, knowing that I do have privilege and be able to, and having the ability to speak out and having actually having the courage to go against our oppressors who my ancestors had no chance against. So, well, that's personally for me. I don't know about everybody else, but.
Does anyone else want to answer that question?
Well, I can say that I think that other activists, they give a lot of hope to fight further because they have this energy and they're not afraid of the consequences, and they know that they are fighting for the future, not only for them but for the people, and that really inspires me.
Thank you. Charles, you raised your hand.
Yes, I have a question. How do you feel like if somebody who isn't from your land, isn't your people, come to your land and take away all your resources, which was yours? How do you feel? Like, do you feel angry? Do you feel sad? Do you feel like really triggered, offended?
Does anyone want to answer that question?
Sharmaine, maybe? Do you want to answer that question? Or Kianna, Sonya?
I'll get started on this one again. Honestly, it's what's expected. I mean, we just saw the earlier. We saw the reversal of what's supposed to be like an environmental like advancement for us, taken away again, and it's been expected. It's happened to us so many times, and that's always something that we keep in mind. Although we have that hope piece, we know that the federal government won't be there for us, and that we have to continue. So it's more of like an expected thing more than like a sad or angered thing.
Thank you. Sharmaine, would you like to answer that question?
Ang sutong pag-English, abi? Ay.
Wait lang. Ano. I feel angry. I feel angry. That's why I will defend my land as a Lumad student. We are disappointed to our government because they are the reason why the mining and plantation corporation in our country want to exploit our land. Hila mo. Na, kato lang.
Sorry, I can't speak in
Sorry, I can't straight to speak in English. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your answer, and we understand. Anyone else have any questions? Charles, do you still have a question? Santiago, would you like to speak?
Sí. Bueno, pues, frente a la pregunta es seguir y mantener nuestros usos y costumbres, mantener nuestras raíces, no dejarlas perder. Cuidar el territorio es mantener viva la madre tierra, es protegerla, es poder tener un mundo donde podamos estar en paz y en armonía con ella, con los seres que la habitan. Nuestra lucha es eso, cuidarla, mantenerla y no dejar que otras personas con fines de lucro la dañen. Es asegurar todo eso para las generaciones venideras. Es todo lo que les vamos a transmitir, todos nuestros conocimientos y todos nuestros usos y costumbres.
Gracias, Santiago. So he said he was answering Joe's question, and he's saying that they are doing this to follow and maintain their culture. They don't want to let companies to take them that away, because taking care of the territory is keeping the Mother Earth alive, and the fight is to keep and don't let other people to destroy everything for profit, and that's because they want to transmit what they know to the further generations. That's it.
Thank you so much, Santiago, and thank you, Liliana, for translating. Are there any more questions? Oh, okay. So, thank you everyone for joining. It's been an amazing press conference. Thank you to all the speakers for speaking about your experiences. And thank you everyone who came to listen. This is pretty much the end. So thank you all and bye.